A racist security guard refused to let Shaquille O'Neal through to his jet. However, what happened next came as a complete surprise and shocked everyone around him. Find out how this incident changed everything. Don't forget to subscribe and write in the comments where you're watching this video from. Shaquille O'Neal stood on the balcony of his penthouse, gazing out at the sprawling city below. The golden hues of the setting sun reflected off the skyscrapers, casting long shadows over the bustling streets. It was a view he had come to associate with success, a hard-earned vantage point that symbolized how far he had come from the modest beginnings of his childhood. But tonight, the view did little to quell the restless energy coursing through him. He was on the brink of making a decision that, for him, felt monumental. Owning a private jet had always been a dream, though not for the reasons most would assume. For many, a private jet symbolized extravagance and ego, a means to flaunt wealth and status. But for Shaquille, it was about something deeper. Freedom. The freedom to move, to reach people and places without limitations, to expand his growing business empire, and, most importantly, to fuel his philanthropic aspirations. He envisioned it as a tool, not a trophy. The idea had come to him during a recent trip to a remote community in the Midwest. He had been invited to speak at a school where students struggled with poverty and limited resources. The experience had left a profound impact on him. The children's wide-eyed curiosity and determination reminded him of his own childhood, growing up with big dreams and limited opportunities. It was on the flight back, cramped in a commercial plane, that the thought struck him. What if he had the means to reach these places more efficiently, to visit more schools, more communities, and provide real, tangible support? He ran his hand over his jaw, deep in thought. The decision wasn't just about logistics. It was about making a statement. It was about showing the world, and himself, that he had arrived at a place where he could dream even bigger. The ringing of his phone pulled him from his reverie. He glanced at the screen. It was Mark, his longtime business advisor and close friend. "Shaq, you there?" Mark's voice came through with its usual brisk energy. "Yeah, I'm here. Just thinking," Shaquille replied, his voice steady but contemplative. "About the jet, right? I know that tone." Mark chuckled on the other end. "So, what's the verdict? Are you going for it?" Shaquille hesitated for a moment, then exhaled. "I think I am." "It's not just for me, Mark, you know that." "I do, and I respect it. But you've got to be sure this is a big investment, and it'll come with its own set of challenges. People are going to talk. You know how they are." Shaquille leaned against the railing, letting the evening breeze cool his thoughts. He knew what Mark meant. Despite his success, he was no stranger to scrutiny. His every move was analyzed, criticized, and often misunderstood. But this wasn't about public opinion. It was about his vision, his purpose. "I've thought about that," he said finally, "but I can't let fear dictate my decisions. This isn't just about me flying in luxury. It's about creating opportunities, breaking barriers. And if people want to talk, let them. I'll show them what this jet is really for." Mark paused, then replied with a note of approval. "That's what I wanted to hear. All right, let's make it happen. I'll start pulling some options for you to review." Over the next few weeks, the process of selecting the right jet began. Shaquille threw himself into the details, immersing himself in a world he had never explored before. He visited hangars, spoke with manufacturers, and weighed the pros and cons of different models. Each visit brought a new sense of excitement and clarity. The jets themselves were marvels of engineering. Sleek, powerful, and designed with precision. But beyond the aesthetics, Shaquille was drawn to their potential. He finally settled on a model that struck the perfect balance between luxury and practicality. It was spacious enough to accommodate his team and guests, equipped with cutting-edge technology, and had the range to reach the most remote corners of the country. The day he signed the papers, he felt a surge of pride and anticipation. This was it. His vision was coming to life. The first time he stepped aboard the jet, it was like walking into a new chapter of his life. The interior was immaculate, with leather seats, polished wood accents, and panoramic windows that offered breathtaking views of the sky. But what excited him most was the opportunity it represented. He could already picture the lives he would touch, the places he would go, and the change he would inspire. As the weeks passed, Shaquille's excitement grew. He began planning his first flight, a trip to visit several communities where he had ongoing projects. The itinerary was packed, but he was eager to hit the ground running. This wasn't just a new mode of transportation, it was a new way of life. On the eve of the inaugural flight, he stood in his living room, staring at a framed photo of his younger self. In the picture, he was a lanky teenager with an oversized basketball, his eyes full of hope and determination. He smiled, feeling a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought him here. "You've come a long way," he murmured to himself, "but the work's just beginning." As he turned off the lights and prepared for the day ahead, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Tomorrow he would take to the skies, not just as a symbol of his success, but as a beacon of what was possible. What he didn't know was that his first flight would bring challenges he could never have anticipated, testing his resolve and reshaping his mission in ways he could not yet imagine. The morning of Shaquille's inaugural flight arrived with the promise of clear skies and endless possibilities. The sun bathed the private airstrip in a warm glow as Shaquille's car rolled through the gates. He leaned back in the plush leather seat, savoring the moment. This was it, the beginning of a new chapter. The jet, a masterpiece of sleek engineering and custom design, gleamed on the tarmac like a beacon of achievement. As the car pulled up to the hangar, Shaquille stepped out, greeted by the hum of activity around him. Technicians and crew members moved with practiced efficiency, readying the plane for departure. The air smelled faintly of aviation fuel and freshly cut grass, mingling with the crisp breeze. Shaquille adjusted his tailored blazer and strode toward the jet with an easy confidence. He was proud of what this moment represented, not just for him, but for everyone who had ever dared to dream bigger than their circumstances. The calm was shattered when a voice called out from behind him. "Hey, you! Hold it right there!" Shaquille turned, his brow furrowing. A security guard approached, his posture stiff and his expression stern. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, his uniform crisp, but his demeanor anything but welcoming. Shaquille stopped in his tracks, unsure of what had prompted the interruption. "Can I help you?" Shaquille asked, keeping his tone polite. The guard's eyes narrowed as he looked Shaquille up and down. "This is a private airstrip. You're not supposed to be here." Shaquille tilted his head slightly, taken aback by the man's tone. "I know. I'm here for my flight," he replied, gesturing toward the jet. "That's my plane." The guard let out a sharp laugh, more of a bark than a sound of amusement. "Your plane? That's funny. Now, let's see some ID." Shaquille's patience was already wearing thin, but he reached into his pocket and pulled out his driver's license and a laminated card verifying his ownership of the jet. The guard snatched them from his hand, his eyes darting between the documents and Shaquille. "This can't be right," the guard muttered under his breath. He glanced up, his expression twisting with suspicion. "How exactly did you afford a plane like this?" Shaquille's jaw tightened. He had encountered prejudice before, but it never failed to sting. "I worked for it," he said evenly. "Now, if you're done, I'd like to get to my flight." The guard didn't move. Instead, he stepped closer, his voice lowering but losing none of its hostility. "Look, buddy, I don't know what kind of scam you're running, but I've seen this kind of thing before. You don't belong here." The accusation hit like a slap. Shaquille squared his shoulders, his imposing frame towering over the guard, but he kept his voice calm. "I don't know what you think you've seen, but this isn't a scam. I own that plane, and I have every right to be here." The guard's face hardened, and he crossed his arms. "We'll see about that. I'm calling the police." Before Shaquille could respond, the guard stepped away, pulling a radio from his belt. Shaquille stood there, his mind racing. He could feel the eyes of the crew on him, their curiosity tinged with unease. The sense of triumph that had filled him earlier was gone, replaced by a heavy knot of anger and disbelief. Within minutes, the wail of sirens broke through the quiet morning. 2 police cars pulled up, their lights flashing, and 4 officers stepped out. They approached the scene with measured steps, their hands resting on their belts. The guard rushed to meet them, gesturing animatedly in Shaquille's direction. Shaquille took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay composed. He watched as the officers listened to the guard's account, their expressions shifting from neutrality to skepticism. Finally, one of them turned to him. "Sir, we're going to need to see your identification and proof of ownership for the aircraft," the officer said, his tone firm but not devoid of the guard's overt hostility. Shaquille handed over his documents again, keeping his movements deliberate. The officer examined them carefully, but the crease in his brow didn't ease. "These look legitimate," the officer said finally, but his tone carried a note of doubt. "Still, we're going to have to verify everything, you understand." Shaquille nodded, though his patience was wearing thin. "I understand, but this is unnecessary. Everything you need is right there." The verification process dragged on. The officers called in the documents, cross-referencing them with aviation authorities. Shaquille stood by the jet, his arms crossed, while the guard hovered nearby, a self-satisfied smirk on his face. The crew had dispersed, giving the scene a wide berth, but their furtive glances spoke volumes. As the minutes turned into nearly an hour, Shaquille's frustration grew. Memories from his past began to resurface, moments when he had been underestimated, dismissed, or outright insulted because of the color of his skin. He had thought he had left those experiences behind, but here they were again, rearing their ugly heads. Finally, one of the officers approached, holding the documents. "Everything checks out. You're free to go," he said, his tone clipped, as if he were reluctant to admit it. Shaquille took the papers and looked the officer square in the eye. "That's it? No apology for wasting my time? For assuming I didn't belong here?" The officer hesitated, but before he could respond, the guard interjected. "Look, we were just doing our job. You should be glad we're thorough." Shaquille's temper flared. "Thorough? This wasn't thorough. This was profiling, plain and simple. And you know it." The guard's smirk faded, but he didn't respond. The officers exchanged uneasy glances before returning to their cars. As the vehicles pulled away, Shaquille turned back to the jet. The moment that had once felt like a triumphant milestone now felt tarnished. As he boarded the plane, his thoughts were a whirlwind of anger, disappointment, and resolve. He knew this was more than just an isolated incident. It was a reflection of a deeper issue, one that couldn't be ignored. As the engines roared to life and the jet began to taxi down the runway, Shaquille stared out the window, his mind already turning to how he would respond. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The engines roared as Shaquille's jet lifted off the tarmac, but the usual thrill of flight eluded him. He stared out the window, the sprawling city below gradually fading into a patchwork of fields and roads, his thoughts a storm of frustration and disbelief. What should have been a triumphant first flight in his new jet was overshadowed by the events that had unfolded on the ground. He gripped the armrest tightly, replaying the confrontation with the guard and the subsequent humiliation by the police. The memory of the guard's smirk was like a thorn in his mind. He could still hear the man's condescending voice, dripping with suspicion and disdain. "You don't belong here." Those words echoed in his head, each repetition stoking the fire of his anger. It wasn't just the words themselves, but the weight of the implication. No matter how far he had come, how much he had achieved, there were still people who saw him as less than, who believed he didn't deserve to stand where he did. Shaquille let out a frustrated sigh and leaned back in his seat. His assistant, Laura, who had joined him for the flight, glanced at him from across the cabin. She hesitated before speaking, her voice soft but concerned. "Shaq, are you okay?" He turned to her, forcing a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm fine," he said, though the tightness in his voice betrayed him. Laura tilted her head, studying him. "You don't look fine. That was a lot back there." Shaquille's smile faded. He looked down at his hands, the tension in his shoulders refusing to ease. "Yeah," he admitted quietly. "It was." Laura set her tablet aside and leaned forward. "You don't have to hold it all in, you know. What happened back there wasn't right. Anyone could see that." Shaquille appreciated her words, but they did little to dull the sting of what he had experienced. "It's not the first time," he said, his voice low. "You'd think I'd be used to it by now." "But you shouldn't have to be," Laura replied firmly. "You've worked hard for everything you have. You earned that plane, just like you earned your success. No one has a right to question that." Her words resonated, but they also brought a wave of conflicting emotions. Shaquille had always prided himself on his resilience, his ability to rise above challenges and prove his worth through action. But this time felt different. This time, the humiliation cut deeper. As the plane leveled out at cruising altitude, Shaquille's mind drifted back to his childhood. He remembered a specific incident from his early school years, a memory he had buried but never truly forgotten. He was 8 years old, sitting in a classroom filled with other kids. It was career day, and everyone had been asked to share their dreams for the future. When his turn came, he stood up, his voice filled with excitement as he declared, "I'm going to be a basketball star." The room erupted in laughter. His classmates didn't believe him, and neither did the teacher, who had smiled indulgently and said, "That's a nice dream, Shaquille, but maybe you should think of something more realistic." That moment had stayed with him, a reminder of how people often judged him before they knew his potential. It wasn't just the laughter. It was the underlying message that he wasn't enough, that his dreams were too big for someone like him. The memory mingled with the events of the morning, creating a bitter cocktail of emotions. Laura's voice broke through his thoughts. "Shaq, what are you going to do about it?" He looked up, her question catching him off guard. "Do about what? About what happened? About the way they treated you? Are you just going to let it go?" Shaquille hesitated. His first instinct was to brush it off, to focus on the positive and move forward. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that ignoring it wouldn't make it go away. This wasn't just about him. It was about everyone who had ever been judged unfairly, everyone who had been made to feel like they didn't belong. "I don't know yet," he admitted, "but I can't let it slide, not this time." Laura nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Maybe this is an opportunity to make a statement, to show people that this kind of behavior isn't acceptable." Her words planted a seed in his mind. As the plane flew on, Shaquille began to consider how he could turn this experience into something meaningful. The anger still simmered beneath the surface, but it was beginning to transform into something else. Resolve. The flight ended without incident, but the morning's events lingered like a shadow. As Shaquille stepped off the jet, he was greeted by a group of local organizers who had been eagerly awaiting his arrival. Their smiles and warm handshakes were a stark contrast to the hostility he had faced earlier, and for a moment, he felt the glimmer of hope. One of the organizers, a middle-aged woman named Clara, led him to a group of children who had gathered to meet him. Their eyes lit up when they saw him, their excitement palpable. Shaquille knelt down to their level, listening as they shared their dreams and aspirations. It was moments like these that reminded him why he did what he did. But even as he engaged with the children, the memory of the guards' words lingered in the back of his mind. The injustice of it gnawed at him, refusing to be ignored. As he boarded the car that would take him to his next destination, he pulled out his phone and opened the camera app. He hesitated for a moment, then hit record. Looking into the camera, he began to speak, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Today was supposed to be a celebration," he said. "The first flight in my new jet, a symbol of everything I've worked for. But instead, I was met with suspicion, hostility, and doubt. Not because I did anything wrong, but because of who I am and how I look. This isn't just about me. It's about a system that still judges people by the color of their skin, no matter how far they've come." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I'm sharing this because I know I'm not alone. There are so many people out there who face this kind of treatment every day, and it needs to stop. We need to have these conversations even when they're uncomfortable. We need to demand better." He ended the video with a promise. "This isn't over. I'm going to make sure something good comes out of this. For me, for you, for all of us." As he hit the upload button and watched the video begin to spread, he felt a sense of clarity. The humiliation and anger were still there, but they were no longer just emotions. They were fuel for action, a catalyst for change. As Shaquille sat in the backseat of his car, watching the video upload progress bar inch its way to completion, he felt a strange mix of nerves and anticipation. Sharing his story was not a decision he had made lightly, but it felt necessary, urgent even. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every person who had ever been judged unfairly, who had felt the sting of prejudice cutting through their accomplishments. When the video finally went live, Shaquille closed his phone and leaned back, staring out the window as the car sped toward his next destination. For the moment, there was nothing more he could do. The rest was up to the world. It didn't take long. By the time Shaquille reached his hotel, his phone was already buzzing relentlessly. Notifications flooded in, comments, shares, messages of support. Laura, who had been monitoring the video's reach, met him in the lobby, her expression a mix of amazement and urgency. "Shaq," she said, holding up her tablet, "you're trending. And I don't mean just a little. This thing is blowing up." Shaquille raised an eyebrow, taking the tablet from her hands. The video had been viewed over 500,000 times in just 2 hours, and the numbers were climbing rapidly. Social media was ablaze with discussions, the hashtags #FlyingWhileBlack and #ShaqSpeaksOut leading the charge. Celebrities, activists, and ordinary people alike were weighing in, sharing their own stories of discrimination and rallying behind Shaquille's call for change. The comments were a mix of outrage and support. "This is disgusting. How does this still happen in 2024? Shaq, you're an inspiration. Thank you for speaking out. Every time I think we've made progress, something like this happens. We need to do better." But not all the reactions were positive. As always, there were detractors, voices questioning his intentions, accusing him of overreacting, or worse, fabricating the incident for attention. Here we go again, playing the victim card. Maybe if you acted like you belonged there, this wouldn't have happened. Typical celebrity drama. Must be nice to have problems like this. Shaquille felt a flicker of anger as he scrolled through the negativity, but he pushed it aside. He hadn't shared his story for the trolls. He had done it for the people who understood, for those who needed to see that they weren't alone. The buzz continued to grow. By the evening, news outlets had picked up the story, and Shaquille found himself fielding interview requests from major networks. Laura sat across from him in the hotel lounge, a whirlwind of efficiency as she managed his schedule. "CNN wants to do a live interview tomorrow morning," she said, scrolling through her phone. "The New York Times is asking for a written statement, and there's an email from Oprah's team. They're interested in having you on her show." Shaquille ran a hand over his face, the weight of it all beginning to settle on his shoulders. "This is bigger than I expected," he admitted. "That's because it's not just about you," Laura said gently. "This is striking a chord with people. You've opened a door that a lot of folks have been waiting to walk through." Her words stayed with him. That night, as he lay in bed, Shaquille's thoughts were a blur of past and present. He remembered the moments of discrimination he had faced throughout his life, some blatant, others subtle, but all of them leaving their mark. He thought about the people who didn't have his platform, who couldn't share their stories with millions. And he thought about the future, about what he could do to make a difference. The next day, Shaquille stepped into the spotlight with a renewed sense of purpose. The CNN interview was his first public statement since the video went viral, and he approached it with equal parts determination and apprehension. Sitting across from the host, the studio lights casting a warm glow, he spoke candidly about what had happened. "This isn't just about me," he said, his deep voice steady but charged with emotion. "It's about a system that allows this kind of behavior to persist. I'm speaking out because I have the platform to do so, but there are so many people who face this every day and don't have a voice. That's who I'm doing this for." The interview was raw and powerful, and it only added fuel to the fire. By the end of the day, the story had gone global, sparking debates about race, privilege, and systemic bias. Social media continued to buzz with activity, and Shaquille found himself inundated with messages from people sharing their own experiences of prejudice and discrimination. One message, in particular, caught his attention. It was from a young man named Marcus, who worked as a baggage handler at a small regional airport. Marcus wrote about how he had been repeatedly passed over for promotions despite his hard work and dedication, all because his supervisors assumed he wasn't management material. He thanked Shaquille for speaking out, saying that it gave him hope. Shaquille read the message twice, his chest tightening. Marcus's story was just one of many, but it underscored the importance of what he was doing. This wasn't just about exposing injustice. It was about empowering people to believe in their own worth, to fight for their place in a world that often tried to push them down. As the days went on, the conversation continued to grow. Activists and organizations reached out, offering their support and sharing ideas for how to turn the momentum into meaningful action. Shaquille began to see a path forward, a way to channel the anger and frustration he had felt into something positive. But not everyone was ready to embrace change. The management of the private airstrip where the incident had occurred released a statement that was equal parts apology and deflection. They expressed regret for any misunderstanding, but stopped short of acknowledging any wrongdoing. The guard, they claimed, had been acting in accordance with protocol. Shaquille wasn't surprised, but the response only strengthened his resolve. He knew that real change wouldn't come from statements or surface-level apologies. It would come from action, from holding people accountable and creating systems that prioritized fairness and respect. By the end of the week, Shaquille's story had become a rallying cry. Protests were organized, petitions circulated, and discussions about systemic bias took center stage in media and public forums. Shaquille, meanwhile, began to lay the groundwork for his next steps. He wanted to do more than just speak out. He wanted to create lasting change. As he sat in his office one evening, reviewing plans for a new initiative to support marginalized communities, Laura walked in with a smile. "You're not going to believe this," she said, holding up her phone. "The airstrip just announced they're launching mandatory bias training for all staff. And the guard, he's been fired." Shaquille looked up, a flicker of satisfaction crossing his face. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a step in the right direction. "Good," he said simply, "but we're just getting started." The chapter ends with Shaquille standing at the threshold of a new mission. What began as a moment of humiliation and anger had transformed into a movement for change. And as he looked ahead, he knew there was still much work to be done. The days following the announcement of the airstrip's mandatory bias training and the firing of the guard were a whirlwind for Shaquille. Though a small victory, it was enough to ignite a spark of optimism in a moment that had felt heavy with frustration. Yet, as he sat in his office reviewing messages from supporters and activists, he realized that the real work was just beginning. The scandal had evolved into a national conversation, and Shaquille's name was now inextricably linked to the fight against systemic prejudice. While he hadn't sought out this role, he recognized its importance. It was one thing to spark a conversation, but it was another entirely to turn that energy into meaningful change. As he leaned back in his chair, staring at the blueprint of his newly envisioned initiative, he felt the weight of responsibility settle over him. That evening, Laura joined him in his office, carrying a stack of documents. She placed them on the table and sat down across from him, her eyes scanning his face. "You've been quiet," she said. "What's on your mind?" Shaquille gestured to the plans spread out before him. "This," he said simply. "I want to do more, Laura. Talking about the problem isn't enough. I want to be part of the solution." Laura nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I had a feeling you'd say that. That's why I've been working on something I think you'll like." She slid a folder across the table toward him. Inside were detailed proposals for a new program, one that combined Shaquille's vision for equality with his love of aviation. The idea was simple yet powerful. Use his private jet not just as a tool for his business, but as a means to serve others. He could provide free flights to those in need, patients seeking critical medical care, families reuniting in times of crisis, and students traveling for educational opportunities. The program, aptly named Wings of Hope, would also partner with schools and community organizations to offer scholarships and mentorships in fields like aviation and engineering. Shaquille flipped through the pages, his eyes lighting up as he absorbed the details. "This is it," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "This is what I've been looking for." Over the next several weeks, Shaquille and Laura worked tirelessly to bring the program to life. They reached out to hospitals, schools, and charities, building partnerships and laying the groundwork for their first mission. Every detail was carefully planned, from the logistics of the flights to the stories of the people they would help. The inaugural flight of Wings of Hope was scheduled to transport a young girl named Mia and her mother from a small town in Kansas to a children's hospital in Boston. Mia was only 7 years old and had been diagnosed with a rare heart condition. Her family's modest income and the distance to specialized care had made her treatment a daunting challenge. When they received the call from Shaquille's team offering assistance, Mia's mother had broken down in tears. On the day of the flight, Shaquille arrived at the airstrip early, eager to meet Mia and her mother. The jet stood ready on the tarmac, its sleek exterior now adorned with the Wings of Hope logo, a symbol of possibility and promise. When the family arrived, Shaquille greeted them warmly, kneeling to shake Mia's hand. "Hi, Mia," he said, his deep voice gentle. "Are you ready for an adventure?" Mia nodded shyly, clutching a stuffed bear to her chest. Her mother, still overwhelmed by the gesture, struggled to find the words to thank him. "You're giving us hope," she said finally, her voice breaking. "I don't know how we can ever repay you." Shaquille placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to," he said. "This is what it's all about." The flight itself was a transformative experience. Mia's initial nerves gave way to wonder as she gazed out the window, watching the clouds drift by. Shaquille joined her at one point, pointing out landmarks below and sharing stories about his own travels. For Mia, the journey wasn't just a means to medical care, it was a glimpse into a world she had never imagined. When they landed in Boston, a team of hospital staff was waiting to greet them. Mia and her mother were escorted to their next destination, but not before Mia turned back to wave at Shaquille, her smile wide and full of gratitude. That first flight set the tone for what Wings of Hope would become. News of the program spread quickly, drawing attention from media outlets and inspiring others to get involved. Donations poured in, allowing Shaquille to expand the initiative and add more flights to the schedule. Each mission brought its own set of challenges and triumphs, but the impact was undeniable. One particularly memorable flight involved transporting supplies to a hurricane-stricken region in the Caribbean. The jet was loaded with medical kits, clean water, and food, and Shaquille personally accompanied the team to ensure the delivery went smoothly. The devastation they encountered was sobering, but the gratitude of the people they helped made every effort worthwhile. In addition to the flights, Shaquille began hosting events on board the jet. One evening, he invited a group of high school students from underserved communities for a special dinner in the air. The cabin, usually reserved for business meetings and travel, was transformed into a makeshift classroom. As the plane cruised above the clouds, Shaquille and his team shared stories of perseverance and success, encouraging the students to dream big. During one of these events, a young boy named Malik approached Shaquille hesitantly. "Mr. O'Neal," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "do you think someone like me could ever be a pilot?" Shaquille crouched down to meet Malik's gaze. "I don't think you can," he said with a grin. Malik's face fell for a moment before Shaquille continued, "I know you can, but you have to believe it first. If you're willing to work hard, the sky's the limit, literally." The boy's face lit up, and Shaquille felt a surge of pride. These moments, he realized, were the true measure of success. As Wings of Hope gained momentum, it became more than just a program, it became a movement. Shaquille's vision inspired others to contribute in their own ways, from pilots volunteering their time to companies donating resources. The ripple effect was profound, touching lives far beyond what Shaquille had initially imagined. By the end of the year, Wings of Hope had completed dozens of missions, each one a testament to the power of turning adversity into action. Shaquille stood on the tarmac one evening, watching as another jet took off on a mission. The hum of the engines and the glow of the runway lights filled him with a sense of fulfillment he hadn't felt in a long time. As the plane disappeared into the night sky, Laura joined him, her hands in her pockets. "You did good, Shaq," she said, her voice soft but full of pride. "We did good," he corrected, a smile tugging at his lips. "And we're just getting started." The chapter ends with Shaquille looking ahead, his heart and mind focused on the journey still to come. Wings of Hope was more than just a response to injustice. It was a new path, a beacon of what was possible when determination met purpose. The success of Wings of Hope had exceeded even Shaquille's loftiest expectations. What had begun as a response to a personal slight had blossomed into a program that was changing lives. Yet, Shaquille knew that the work was far from over. He wanted to expand the initiative's impact, to reach not just those in immediate need, but also the dreamers, the young people who, like himself years ago, needed someone to believe in them. It was Laura who first suggested the idea of hosting dinners aboard the jet. "Imagine this," she had said, her eyes lighting up with excitement. "We turn the jet into a space for inspiration, a classroom in the sky. We invite students, give them an unforgettable experience, and show them what's possible." Shaquille had loved the idea immediately. It combined two things he cared deeply about, creating opportunities and showing people that their dreams were within reach. He envisioned these dinners not just as meals, but as transformative experiences, a chance to plant seeds of hope and ambition in young minds. The first dinner was planned for a group of high school students from an underserved community in Chicago. These were kids who had grown up in environments where opportunities were scarce and dreams often felt out of reach. Shaquille wanted to give them a night they would never forget. The evening began at a small private terminal where the students, dressed in their best outfits, gathered with wide eyes and nervous smiles. Many of them had never been near an airplane, let alone boarded one. Shaquille greeted them personally, shaking hands and cracking jokes to put them at ease. His towering presence could be intimidating, but his warm demeanor quickly broke down any barriers. As the group boarded the jet, their awe was palpable. The interior, usually reserved for business meetings and executives, had been transformed for the occasion. The seats were arranged around elegantly set tables, complete with crisp white linens, sparkling glassware, and centerpieces that shimmered under the cabin lights. The atmosphere was one of understated luxury, designed to make the students feel special. Once everyone was seated, the jet taxied down the runway and lifted into the sky. The students gasped as the city lights below turned into a sprawling tapestry of twinkling stars. For many of them, this was their first flight, and the experience was both exhilarating and surreal. As the plane leveled out at cruising altitude, the meal began. A team of chefs had prepared a gourmet menu, but the real highlight of the evening wasn't the food. It was the conversations. Seated at each table were mentors from various fields, including pilots, engineers, entrepreneurs, and artists, all of whom had been carefully chosen for their ability to inspire and connect with the students. Shaquille himself moved from table to table, engaging in heartfelt discussions and sharing his own story. He talked about his journey from a kid with big dreams to a basketball star, and, eventually, to a businessman and philanthropist. He was honest about the challenges he had faced, the doubters, the setbacks, and the moments of self-doubt, and how he had overcome them. At one table, he sat across from Malik, a shy but bright-eyed teenager who had been handpicked by his school counselor to attend the dinner. Malik had a passion for aviation, but had never dared to say it aloud, fearing ridicule or dismissal. As the meal progressed, Shaquille noticed Malik's quiet demeanor and decided to draw him out. "Malik," Shaquille said, leaning forward with a kind smile, "what's your dream? What do you want to do when you grow up?" Malik hesitated, his eyes darting nervously around the table. Finally, he took a deep breath and said, "I want to be a pilot, but I don't think it's realistic." Shaquille's smile widened. "Why not?" Malik shrugged, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's expensive, and I don't know anyone who's done it. People like me don't become pilots." Shaquille's expression grew serious. "Malik, I want you to listen to me. Don't ever let anyone tell you what you can or can't be. If you have the passion and the determination, you can do it. And you're not alone. There are programs, scholarships, and people who want to help you succeed." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a card with the Wings of Hope logo. "This is my promise to you," he said, handing Malik the card. "You work hard, and we'll help you find a way. Deal?" Malik's eyes filled with tears as he nodded, clutching the card like it was a lifeline. It was a moment that Shaquille knew he would never forget. As the evening continued, the mentors shared their own stories of overcoming adversity and chasing their dreams. The students listened intently, their initial nervousness replaced by curiosity and excitement. The cabin was filled with the hum of conversation and the occasional burst of laughter, creating an atmosphere of hope and possibility. Toward the end of the flight, Shaquille stood at the front of the cabin to address the group. His voice was warm and powerful, carrying the weight of his sincerity. "I want you all to remember this night," he said, "not because of the plane or the fancy dinner, but because of what it represents. Every one of you has the potential to do incredible things. You have dreams, and those dreams are valid. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And when you face challenges, and you will, remember that you're not alone. There are people out there who believe in you, who want to see you succeed." He paused, looking around the cabin at the young faces filled with a mixture of hope and determination. "You are the future," he said, "and I can't wait to see what you'll accomplish." As the jet descended back toward Chicago, the students stared out the windows at the city lights below, their minds racing with newfound possibilities. When they disembarked, they carried with them not just the memories of an extraordinary evening, but also a sense of empowerment that they could take with them into their lives. In the weeks that followed, Shaquille received letters from many of the students, thanking him for the experience and sharing how it had impacted them. Malik, true to his word, began researching aviation programs and reached out to Wings of Hope for guidance. Shaquille personally connected him with a mentor, ensuring that his dream of becoming a pilot would have a fighting chance. The success of the dinner inspired Shaquille to make it a regular event, each one tailored to a different group of young dreamers. With every flight, he saw the ripple effect of hope and inspiration spreading further, touching lives in ways he hadn't imagined. For Shaquille, the dinners were a reminder of why he had started Wings of Hope in the first place. It wasn't just about addressing injustice. It was about creating opportunities, lifting others up, and showing them that the sky was not the limit, but just the beginning. As another dinner ended and the jet taxied to a stop, Shaquille stood at the cabin door, watching the students disembark with wide smiles and excited chatter. Laura joined him, her expression one of quiet pride. "You're making a difference, Shaq," she said. He nodded, his gaze fixed on the students. "So are they," he replied. "They just don't know it yet." The chapter concludes with Shaquille looking out at the night sky, a symbol of the limitless potential he hoped to inspire in everyone who crossed his path. The night sky stretched endlessly above the private airstrip as Shaquille stood on the tarmac, watching the latest Wings of Hope jet ascend into the heavens. Its powerful engines roared like a declaration, carrying supplies to a hurricane-ravaged region in the Caribbean. The glow of its lights reflected in Shaquille's eyes, a reminder of how far this journey had come. What had begun as an infuriating encounter filled with prejudice had blossomed into a movement that transcended him, touching lives in ways he could never have imagined. The air was crisp, carrying with it a sense of promise. Laura stood by his side, a tablet clutched in her hands, the screen glowing with updates about the program's latest accomplishments. "That's mission number 54, she said, her tone tinged with pride. 54 missions in less than a year, Shaq. Do you realize what that means?" Shaquille didn't respond immediately. Instead, he watched the jet disappear into the night, its blinking lights growing fainter until they vanished completely. Only then did he turn to Laura. "It means we're just getting started," he said, his deep voice steady but filled with determination. Laura nodded, a knowing smile on her lips. "You're right, and you're not the only one who thinks so." She handed him the tablet, where an email was open from a prominent national foundation. They wanted to partner with Wings of Hope, offering significant funding to expand its operations. The proposal included additional aircraft, training programs, and even a global initiative to extend the program's reach to underserved regions around the world. Shaquille's eyes scanned the email, his mind racing. The possibilities were staggering, but so were the responsibilities. This wasn't just about planes or flights anymore. It was about creating a lasting legacy, a symbol of hope and change that would endure long after he was gone. "Let's do it," he said finally, handing the tablet back to Laura. "But I want to make sure it stays true to what we started. This isn't about headlines or awards, it's about people." Laura nodded again. "Of course. That's why it works. It's always been about the people." As the days turned into weeks, the expansion of Wings of Hope began to take shape. New partnerships were formed, bringing in experts from various fields to enhance the program's impact. Pilots volunteered their time, eager to be part of something meaningful. Engineers offered to design more efficient systems for delivering aid. Educators reached out, proposing ways to integrate the program into schools and inspire the next generation of leaders. One of the most ambitious projects was the creation of a dedicated training program for aspiring pilots from underserved communities. Shaquille had been deeply moved by his conversation with Malik during the dinner flight, and he wanted to ensure that other young people with similar dreams had the resources and support they needed to succeed. The program, aptly named Liftoff, was designed to provide scholarships, mentorship, and hands-on experience in the aviation industry. The first cohort of trainees included a diverse group of young men and women, each with their own story of perseverance and determination. Shaquille made it a point to meet with them personally, sharing his own journey and encouraging them to embrace their dreams. "You're here because you've earned it," he told them during their orientation. "Don't ever let anyone make you feel like you don't belong. This is your chance to prove them wrong, not for them, but for yourselves." The trainees responded with enthusiasm, their passion evident in their eagerness to learn. Watching them take their first steps towards becoming pilots filled Shaquille with a sense of pride and purpose. It was moments like these that reminded him why he had turned his anger into action. As Wings of Hope continued to grow, its impact became impossible to ignore. News outlets covered the program extensively, highlighting its success stories and the lives it had touched. One particularly moving segment featured Mia, the young girl from Kansas who had been the first beneficiary of the program. Now, healthy and thriving, she appeared on camera with her mother, expressing their gratitude for the second chance at life that Wings of Hope had given them. "It wasn't just a flight," Mia's mother said tearfully. "It was hope. It was a reminder that there are people out there who care." The segment went viral, drawing even more attention to the program. Donations poured in, and volunteers from all walks of life offered their services. Wings of Hope was no longer just a program. It was a symbol of what could be achieved when compassion and determination came together. Despite the accolades and recognition, Shaquille remained grounded. He knew that the work was far from over. There were still countless people in need, still barriers to break and minds to change. But he also knew that Wings of Hope had become something bigger than himself. It was a movement, driven by the collective efforts of people who believed in a better world. One evening, as Shaquille prepared for a speaking engagement, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He thought about the guard at the airstrip, the police officers who had doubted him, and the humiliation he had felt in that moment. It would have been easy to let anger consume him, to lash out or retreat into bitterness. But instead, he had chosen to fight. Not with fists, but with action. The speaking engagement was at a university, where students from diverse backgrounds had gathered to hear him share his story. As he took the stage, the audience erupted into applause, their energy filling the room. Shaquille raised his hands to quiet them, his towering presence commanding attention. "Thank you," he began, his voice resonating through the auditorium. "But tonight isn't about me. It's about us. It's about what we can achieve when we refuse to let fear or prejudice define us." He spoke about his journey, about the moments that had tested him and the choices that had shaped him. He shared stories from Wings of Hope, highlighting the lives that had been changed and the dreams that had been realized. And he challenged the audience to carry that spirit forward, to find their own ways to make a difference. As he concluded his speech, the room erupted into a standing ovation. But for Shaquille, the real reward came afterward, when students approached him to share their own stories and aspirations. Many of them spoke about how Wings of Hope had inspired them to believe in their own potential, to dream bigger than they ever thought possible. That night, as Shaquille looked out at the city lights from his hotel room, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Wings of Hope was no longer just an idea or a program. It was a symbol. It stood for resilience, for compassion, for the power of turning pain into progress. And as long as there were people who needed a hand up, he knew the work would continue. The story of Shaquille O'Neal and Wings of Hope wasn't just about overcoming prejudice. It was about creating something lasting, something that would inspire and uplift for generations to come. And as the stars sparkled above, Shaquille couldn't help but smile, knowing that the journey was far from over. Thank you for finishing this video. If you enjoyed it, subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Share this video with your friends. Maybe it will inspire someone else. And also, be sure to check out the channel to see other interesting videos. See you in the next issue.